It's Christmas Eve, 1945, Fayetteville, West Virginia. On this night inside the Sodder home, the family were gearing up for Christmas, just like any other family. George and Jenny Sodder were Italian immigrants who had built a life in this quiet coal town, but the peace and quiet of this town was about to be shattered. As the clock struck midnight, the strange events begin to unfold. Jenny awakes to the unmistakable smell of smoke filling the house. Flames quickly engulf the timber home, and George, Jenny, and 4 of their children manage to quickly escape. But upon reaching the cold air outside, George quickly realises that 5 of his children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were trapped inside. After the events of that night, and by the time the sun rose on Christmas morning, their timber home was reduced to ash. And even stranger, the 5 children were gone without a trace, and nothing of them remained. This is just the beginning of what would become one of the most chilling and perplexing mysteries in American history. What happened to the Sodder children? George Sodder had emigrated from Sardinia, Italy, as a young man. He was hard-working and ambitious, and he'd built a successful trucking business in Fayetteville, a town with a large Italian-American population. He's a well-respected man, a hard-working man, but he also has a reputation for being outspoken, especially about his political views. In particular, George was a vocal critic of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, and in Fayetteville, this was no small matter. Many Italian immigrants still held strong ties to their homeland and to Benito. Some supported Mussolini, viewing him as a powerful leader who had brought stability to Italy after World War I. At times, George's vocal opposition made him a target of hostility. He had received threats, but as a strong-willed man, he didn't back down. Jenny was also of Italian descent, and she managed the household, raising their 10 children. They lived comfortably, even though some tension simmered beneath the surface. Leading up to the fire, on that awful Christmas Eve night in 1945, the family now believed there could have been warning signs, and all of them were missed. On that evening, the Sodder family home was filled with excitement. After Marion returned home with presents, the 5 younger children, Maurice 14, Martha 12, Louis 9, Jenny 8, and Betty 5, begged their mum to stay up late. Jenny allowed them to play with their new toys while she, George, and the 2-year-old Sylvia went to bed. The 2 older boys, John, 23, and George Jr., 16, had already retired after a long day working with their father. It was around 12:30 a.m. when the phone rang, waking Jenny. A woman's voice asked for a name Jenny didn't recognise, and when Jenny explained she had the wrong number, the woman laughed strangely before hanging up. Jenny recalls it feeling slightly sinister. Jenny goes to check on the children downstairs. They have all seemingly gone to bed, but the curtains are still open, and the front door was not locked. Jenny draws the curtain and locks the door. She goes back to bed, and a little after 1 a.m, Jenny is again disturbed by the sound of something hitting the roof. It sounds like an object rolling down the roof, followed by a thud. Again, she drifts off to sleep, but it's about half an hour later when Jenny awakes smelling smoke. Jenny runs down to the hallway and finds that George's office, located near the kitchen, was up in flames. Jenny panics and wakes George, and the 2 of them scramble to get their children out the house. The 4 older children, John, George Jr., Marion, and Sylvia, have already escaped, but the flames had already spread to the stairwell and had burned the stairs with them that were leading up to the top floor where the 5 younger children were supposed to be staying. Desperate, the family run outside, and George quickly realises that the 5 younger children have not yet escaped. They are presumed trapped up on the top floor. George's first instinct is to dash back inside, with his children presumably trapped on that 2nd floor, but the fire had taken hold. He sprints outside, hoping to climb up to the children's bedroom using the ladder that he always kept at the side of his house. To George's horror, that ladder was missing. Next, George runs to one of his trucks, intending to drive one up to the house so he could climb up on top of it. But mysteriously, neither of his two trucks were working. Both had been working perfectly the day before. George then even tries to draw water from a rain barrel, but that had frozen solid in the cold. With the fire quickly raging out of control and all attempts to rescue the children being thwarted, the family could do nothing but watch their home burn to the ground. It took less than 45 minutes for the fire to completely consume the house. By dawn on Christmas morning, all that remained of the Sodder home was a pile of smouldering ashes. It took 7 hours for the fire department to show up. They were delayed due to manpower shortages. By the time the fire chief, F.J. Morris, and his crew arrived, it was far too late, and they sifted through the ashes, expecting to find the remains of 5 missing children. There was very little to go on, and already under pressure for arriving so late, the fire department knew they had to come up with something. They take Jenny's story of the fire starting in George's office, and quickly determine that a faulty fuse box by the phone was the likely cause of the fire starting. A few bone fragments were also found, but these fragments were a long way to making up one human being, let alone 5. By the bone fragments, there was also something that could resemble a human organ, perhaps a heart or a liver. The fire marshal has to make a quick decision. He gathers these bone fragments and puts them in a tin. He decides, rather than adding insult to injury to the family, he will not show them or explain that the fragments were not enough to constitute 5 dead children. He decides to bury the tin a short distance from the property, and he tells the family that all of their remains had been lost due to the heat of the fire. Over the next coming days, the Sodder family contemplate what's happened to them. They've lost their family home, and their 5 youngest children have perished. But this is where Jenny starts to contemplate what exactly is going on. How could there be almost no evidence left of her children? Only a few meagre bones, no teeth, and no real evidence that the children were there. Especially when some of the children's toys were found, burnt, but intact. Determined to find her own answers, Jenny conducted her own experiments. She burned animal bones in an effort to see if they could be completely destroyed, but every time, bone fragments remained. This started to deepen her suspicion that the fire had not consumed her children's bodies. She called up several crematoriums, who advised her that a fire would have to burn for several hours at over 2,000 degrees to burn through bone. Now this was just not possible. A house fire does not burn that hot, and it was consumed in under 45 minutes. The family started to consider several strange occurrences in the months and days leading up to the fire. Firstly, a few months before the fire, they had a stranger knock at the door. It was a travelling insurance salesman. After George declined to purchase insurance from this man, the man reportedly warned him, "Your house is going to go up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed." The man had attributed this to George's outspoken criticism of Mussolini. This starts to further hint at the political tension surrounding the Sodder family. Around about the same time, a suspicious repairman also arrived at the house. He came by offering to work on George's truck, but during the visit, he also mentioned something unusual. He pointed out that the family's fuse box would eventually cause a fire. Now, George was confused by this comment, as he'd recently had the house rewired and inspected by the local power company, who confirmed it to be safe. Now, adding to this, on the night of the fire, sometime after that mysterious phone call that Jenny answered, the Sodders family's power line went dead. Now, of course, initially it was assumed that the fire had caused the line to burn, knocking the phones out. However, upon investigation it was discovered that their phone line had been cut, not burned, indicating it had been deliberately severed by someone at the telephone pole. Then you have the missing ladder. George's ladder, which he always kept in the same spot, was then found later lying in a ditch several hundred feet away from the house. This is why George couldn't find it and couldn't climb to the top window. The timing and location of the ladder's disappearance suggests that someone moved it intentionally. And then the trucks. Despite being in perfect working condition just the day before, neither of George's trucks would start on the night of the fire. Now, some again believe this was another deliberate act of sabotage to prevent George from rescuing his children. The mystery of how the fire started almost becomes secondary against the mystery of what happened to the Sodder children. There clearly seems to be foul play at work. Later, George pays for 2 private investigators. After another thorough search of the site, more bones are found. These bones were sent for analysis, and they were confirmed to be part of a male human vertebrae. However, the age of this human would have been no younger than 17. That's 2 years older than one of the missing children. Now, no one knows who these bone fragments belong to, but it does confirm that none of the Sodder children died in that fire. George then becomes aware of rumours that the fire marshal had found some bones. George puts pressure onto the police, and the police question the fire marshal about his findings. He admits to burying some bones in a tin close to the property. The bones in this tin are dug up and sent for analysis as well. The results come back and concludes none of these bones are human, they are all animal bones. A small organ that was supposedly found was also analysed. Now, this turned out to be a beef liver. The fire marshal is again questioned, and he admits to planting these there. His reasons were, if the Sodder family were to inquire in the future, this would give them a small sense of closure that the children had died in the fire, because realistically, what else could have happened to them? Now, further evidence of foul play arrives when a bus driver later states that he saw men throwing burning objects onto the roof of the Sodder house that night. The secondary investigation of the site had uncovered a rubber object which seemed to resemble some kind of grenade. But again, where are the Sodder children? You don't just kidnap 5 children, especially when the parents were in the house. Despite the lack of remains, the Sodder family continued the search for their children, and over the years they received numerous reports or potential sightings. A woman in Charlestown claimed she'd seen the 5 Sodder children in a car the morning after the fire, peering out from the windows as the car sped away. A hotel worker in Charleston, South Carolina also reported seeing the children in 1946. This was in a hotel, accompanied by 2 adults of Italian descent. They said at the time something didn't seem quite right, and when they approached the children, the 2 adults became agitated, almost upset with the hotel workers. In 1967, over 20 years after the fire, Jenny received a photograph in the mail. The picture was of a young man who bore a striking resemblance to her missing son. The back of the photograph contained a cryptic note that read, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, A90, 132 or 35. The note, combined with the uncanny resemblance, led the Sodders to believe that Louis might still be alive, although the photograph and the note were never definitively explained. And remember that bizarre interaction between George and the insurance salesman that had come round? Well, it turns out that that gentleman was part of the official board that had deemed the fire had started from the fuse box in George's study. Over the years, the Sodders were convinced that their 5 children hadn't perished in the fire, but had been abducted. Several theories emerged to try and explain this mystery. The most popular theory is that the children were kidnapped, possibly connected by George's political enemies. The Mussolini connection looms large, with some believing that fascist sympathisers in the area had kidnapped the children either for revenge or as part of a broader plot against the Sodders. Mafia involvement is also a popular theory. Given George's success in business and his refusal to yield to certain local pressures, another theory is that the Mafia targeted the family, potentially for protection money George had refused to pay, or to silence his political views. It's believed that the local organisation Crime Figures could have orchestrated the kidnapping, staging the fire as a cover-up. Some investigators too speculated that the fire was set to distract the family while the children were abducted. This would explain the lack of remains and the mysterious events surrounding the truck and the ladder. Arson and corruption also remains a theory. The fire department's delayed response and Chief Morris's strange behaviour raises eyebrows. Morris even told the family that he found a few bones but quickly buried them in a tin box without telling anyone. It's a highly unprofessional action. When this box is later examined, it's discovered that the bones form an animal, not a human, and he'd planted a beef liver in the box. This just muddies the investigation. Despite all of these strange circumstances and odd pieces of evidence, the Sodder family mystery remains one of the most enduring and perplexing unsolved cases in American history. Now, it seems like the fire was not a tragic accident, even though it was deemed as one. Where are the Sodder children? And were they taken that night? Did they perish in the fire? Or did they leave on their own accord? Remember, the front door hadn't been locked. This must be both one of the saddest and most frustrating stories that we've covered. We have a house fire raging on Christmas Eve after strange activity around the house, a bump on the roof in the night, and a strange phone call, albeit that phone call could be purely coincidental, we just don't know. We have George's ladders missing from the scene, deliberately moved, George's truck being tampered with and not working, the telephone lines cut, a distinct absence from the fire department, partly due to staff shortages, and partly due to the phone lines being cut on Christmas Eve. When they do show up, 7 hours later, we have the truly odd decision with the bones buried in the tin. Bones that turn out to be animal bones with a planted beef liver. It's just strange. There's also the interaction a few months prior with the insurance salesman and the worker, both of whom almost spelled out what will happen in this disaster in the future. There's also the secondary investigation where some fragments of bone from an unknown male were found, although this evidence is thought to have been accidentally dragged there after George had bulldozed over the site to make a memorial garden. The finding of what appeared to be a rubber explosive, grenade or pipe bomb is so significant. There are also further reports that one of the private detectives went missing while carrying out the secondary investigations, and he was never to be seen again. The insurance salesman who had initially threatened George then ends up on the jury or board that tries to deem this fire as an accident. That in itself is gross misconduct. But over all of this, there's no evidence of the children's remains whatsoever. 5 children presumably taken from their home on Christmas Eve, within a likely window of about an hour, followed by a few suspected sightings of the children in transit reported much later. Where are the Sodder children and what happened to them? This whole case is a mess and it stinks of a cover-up. There are failings against the Sodder family left, right and centre, which makes it so frustrating to retell. George and Jenny Sodder spent the rest of their lives searching for answers. They put up a billboard along Route 16 with pictures of their missing children, offering a reward for any information that could solve this mystery. This billboard was up for many, many years, and if you're familiar with Route 16, you may recall seeing it. Jenny wore black for the rest of her life, a symbol for mourning for her lost children. She passed away in 1989, never having found the answers that she sought. George and Jenny never gave up hope. The Sodder case still remains open. It's a cold case with tantalising clues and frustrating dead ends. To this day, no one really knows what truly happened to the Sodder children. Now, what do you guys think? Do you have any more information? Did they perish in the fire? Or is there a darker conspiracy at play? There seems to be. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching today's mystery Retold, and with all such stories, our deepest condolences go to the family involved. We hope one day this mystery will be solved. Good night.